Welcome to Sample Book 5, Sewing with Knits. So we are going to be making a small shirt in the end with a knit fabric. And so keep in mind, the main reason for this is to more see why we don't want first-time sewists to be using a knit fabric because it takes a little practice working with and usually some specialty machines. So this will be broken down into a couple of different videos just because there's quite a few steps and that way it's just not one super long video. So first we're going to start with what the fabric is and preparing that and cutting it. So knit fabrics, it's really important that you get them, that you pre-shrink them if you're going to be wearing them, especially natural fibers. Because knits, because of how they are manufactured, and since those yarns are looped together in the textile production process, are more likely going to move around and get smaller when we wash it, especially for the first time. So you definitely want to pre-shrink if you are going to be wearing this item, which is what we really recommend with any type, regardless of if it's a knit or woven. But with knits, it's especially true. And so all that, how you pre-shrink it is you just launder it like you normally would. So if it's an item that you wash and line dry, or if it's an item that you wash tumble dry low, however that is for the care and what you're going to be doing with the product is what you want to do to pre-shrink it. So we have our 30 yard of knit fabric. And so this particular one is a jersey knit. So it's very similar to what a lot of your kind of like screen print, basic tees, graphic tees are going to be made with. So if this one is really easy to know because there is obviously two different colors to know which side is the right side. But if you're dealing with a knit fabric that you don't know, an easy way to tell is if you pull, like you take two edges and you pull, knits are always going to roll to the right side of fabric. And that might be easier to see with this shorter end. So when I pull it, it's going to start to roll in itself to the right side, but especially on this cut side. Once again, like when I pull, it's starting to roll in on itself. So that's how we know this is the right side of the fabric. So why this is important to know is whenever we're doing our pattern pieces, almost our pattern pieces, whenever they're cut, unless they're specifically tell you to do otherwise, you want to cut it on the wrong side of the fabric. So how both of these we want to be cut on the fold, that means we want to fold this in, and so we can actually fold it in where it's going to be something like this. You can also do it one at a time. And so then this pattern piece is going to go on top of the wrong side with those right sides touching. And so you always want to try and conserve as much fabric as possible. So I can move this one a little bit further over for this piece. Like so. So, a couple of things to know about this pattern in particular, just for the actual instructions. So you see that there are multiple notches on our pattern pieces. The only ones you really need to be concerned about are these ones right here on the shoulder seam, because we are not adding a facing, so you won't need this. We're not adding a sleeve, so you don't need these ones. And this is for another piece that we're also not doing. So the only one that you need is that shoulder seam notch. And so when you're dealing with knits, you always want to make sure it's nice and lined up, make sure it's flat. You don't want this, like let's say if we were on the edge of a table, like pretend this is the edge of our table. And so you don't want that to like fall down because that's going to pull a lot of tension, because you want to cut knit fabrics when they are not taut. So like if you're adding the tension by having that fall to the ground, that's going to stretch it. And so how knit patterns are designed is they are designed kind of like when they are at their relaxed position. and that way they can stretch when you're doing it. So pins sometimes can get a little tricky with knit fabrics. So what we can use instead are pattern weights. So we are going to make sure that we have this lined up. You don't want a lot of space over here on the fold, because then that is just adding inches to it. And so like why we're cutting on the fold is we are not going to have front and back seams going down the chest like you would like a button front shirt. It's going to be nice and flat. And so if you have space there, what's going to happen is going to now make this item larger. And so typically we just, especially on the fold, you line up one and we kind of set one down and scooch it over so that it smooths out, so that they're all on there nice and flat. And you don't want your weights to go over the edge of the pattern. So what you can do now, where did it go? Oh, here it is. I set our white chalk. So you can mark this with white tailor's chalk. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this notch first so I don't forget. And so when you're transferring a pattern to this, you can always kind of like extend these lines past where that edge is, and that is totally fine. And so you kind of like don't want that to go around. So you can do it that way. You can also, and then remove your pattern piece. You can also very carefully line up your shears. So if you're not cutting on the fold, I usually recommend on knits to cut on the single layer. So let's say you're making the sleeves, if I'm gonna, like how I would traditionally make sleeves, then on a woven fabric, I would take my fabric, kind of like fold it over and have that pattern piece down and cut out two at the exact same time. With knits, because it moves around a lot, I don't recommend that. The only time you should is if you are cutting something on the fold like this. So for now, I will say this is a little bit harder to like both move around and also not block the view of the camera. But this is what we're going to be doing. Before I move this, I'm going to make sure I get my notch. Don't want to go too far in, just to have that notch in, and then trim that off. So that is now our shirt front that we now have cut out. So I don't get them confused, we'll just leave that with one pattern, scooch that over to the side, and now repeat the same thing for my shirt back. And so that is how we're going to cut that. Once again, making sure that we are placing the pattern on the wrong side, so when we fold over our fabric, our right sides of fabric are touching so that we can get that fold. So that is how we prepare the pattern pieces for sample book 5, our knit sample.